Welcome to the Art of War in the Wild mini-conference. I'm your host, Sayal Her. This mini-conference is composed of a few panel conversations focused on the real-world application of timeless wisdom. The backdrop is that we are in a world experiencing a leadership crisis on a global scale across various dimensions, both personal and professional, private and public, among many other dimensions, resulting in widespread struggle and suffering. Much of what we're experiencing stems from embracing an almost Pollyannish perspective that romanticizes leadership, human nature, and reality, sterilizes our organizations and enterprises, and infantilizes people in leadership roles, among others. When in reality, we should be embracing a more realistic perspective that integrates every aspect of human nature and reality, including the good, the bad, and the ugly. The Art of War, or the Sun Tzu, provides profound timeless insights into leadership, strategy, culture, conflict, execution, and much more, offering approaches for surviving and thriving in today's reality. The objective of these conversations is to engage a few forward thinkers and forward doers who are reshaping the modern world through the wisdom of the art of war, to explore the gap between principles and practice where reality and theory converge, to explore applying ancient wisdom to modern-day scenarios, highlighting the dynamics between intentions and outcomes, and to illuminate insights for engaging in challenging environments. Welcome to the Art of War in the Wild mini-conference.
And welcome everyone who is tuning in here on the live stream or catching us in the replay afterwards. My name is Todd Nilson, and I am the principal strategist of a consultancy called Clock Tower Advisors. And Sayal here was kind enough to invite me to be today's moderator for this amazing panel that we've got put together for conversing about the art of war in the wild, the second panel in this series. And I was honored to be asked to be a part of this. Sun Tzu's The Art of War has been, I think, part of the background radiation of my life, if you will. The writings have been with me, I think, at least since college, perhaps a little bit earlier than that, personally. And so I think for many of us, and certainly for all of us on the panel, Sun Tzu's The Art of War has been something that has formed us and shaped us in various ways in our responses to it as a document, as a text. My background and training was originally as a literature student, and I did a lot of specialization around Renaissance literature. And my background in looking at a text, looking at any kind of piece of literature is that it's kind of like walking into a funhouse full of different distorted mirrors. Every time we walk into the funhouse, we see something a little bit different. We never encounter the same text the same way each time we meet it. And so even as scholarship develops, even as the text may develop or change over time, we're changing at the same time. And our things that we take away as lessons from a given text like Sun Tzu's The Art of War evolve and change over time, feed us in different ways than we maybe had originally thought of. That's very fertile ground for a course of discussion today that all of us have. And so if you're joining these panels for the first time, welcome. Very glad to have you here. We'll definitely be watching questions in the comments section, and anything appropriate that comes up. We'd love to engage with you as well. But my role here as moderator today is to merely set the group loose so we can have conversations with each other. Not for me to necessarily pose questions beyond the most open-ended ones at the outset, and to maybe draw some conclusions or suggest some connections as we continue to keep things rolling along. So without any further ado, I would like to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. Maybe starting with Rod here, who I see on my left. Take a moment, introduce yourself, what you're working on, and then we'll get into the main body of the conversation following that.
Thanks. So my name's Rod Leaverton. I've worked in strategy professionally for quite some time. I resigned a year ago, but I had operated as the head of strategy and operations for Dell pre-sales for a segment of the business, which was unstructured data. So I've worked a long time in kind of large scale professional strategy, strategy ideation, results management, that type of stuff. But I've been, which we'll talk about here, I've been a student of Sun Tzu's Art of War for well over 25 years. And not as long as some other folks on this call, but for a long time. And it's that one common thread that I continue to come back to it, and it seems to influence every aspect of my life, my professional life, my personal life, even my spiritual life. So it's just very important for me.
Amazing. And thank you, Rod. And Erik, over to you, sir.
Thank you. So I'm Erik Schön, based out of Stockholm, Sweden. I'm managing director for Airline Solutions Nordic. So I'm a practitioner who also likes to write. So I wrote a book called The Art of Strategy, which is basically a modern interpretation of the art of war, with spiced up with some John Boyd and Simon Wardley, which will. Oh! I forgot my copy. Thank you so much. Yeah, and just a little story about how I got into Sun Tzu. Back in the day, before the internet bubble burst, I was in a startup. We grew from 3 to 3,000 in 3 years. Pretty amazing ride. And the visionary guy who founded that startup, he was an amazing guy. And he was like, yeah, Clausewitz is much better than Sun Tzu. You shouldn't read Sun Tzu. You should read Clausewitz. And of course, being a contrarian, I had to read Sun Tzu, and that's where it all started. And it ended with the book a few years back. So yeah, I think I stopped there for now.
Wonderful. I definitely want to delve into that. I'd love to hear about von Clausewitz versus Sun Tzu. Next up, Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi there. My name is Ben Mosior. I am a converted systems administrator turned consultant. Over the years, I learned that the more interesting problems are in the complexity between people and making organizations work more intentionally. I am the creator of LearnWardleyMapping.com, which is a method for helping teams do strategy, created by Simon Wardley. And I'm also the co-author of a deck of cards called Strategy Tactics. Thank you, Rod. Didn't pay you for that, but I appreciate it nonetheless. And Strategy Tactics seeks to provide ways of engaging with the questions of strategy that are accessible to anyone on a team, and ideally together as a team. And I have this hope that we can make strategy more of a team sport rather than something only done by the privileged few. Mm-hmm. So that's a little about me, and thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
The feeling's mutual. I know I had stars in my eyes to meet one of the authors of one of the pip decks. So that's amazing. And then finally, my good friend Sai, if you would say a few words about yourself.
Thank you so much, and an honor to be with all of you. And thank you so much for making the time and the opportunity to share your wisdom with the masses. Let me put it that way. I've been a coach, consultant, practitioner, if you will, author for over 4 decades. I hate to say almost 5 decades at this stage of the game, so far too long. Really focused on transformation being everything that touches all the way from strategy, leadership, culture, execution, you name it, any facet, any aspect of it that comes into play. One of the key things I really have been fortunate to have in my experiences, I've worked with hundreds of organizations, thousands of teams and individuals. I've learned a lot, so I stand on the shoulders of giants that are far greater than myself by every mean. Really helping them calibrate their business models, their operating models, and achieve the kind of impact that they want to have in the world. At the end of the day, I very simply classify myself as a student of life, quite honestly. Very much a pracademic in praxis, as I like to say. Very much focused on the human condition, and our own human nature and the human dynamics that unfold between us to have that broad impact. I'm notorious, I'll say, for saying that the human animal can be the most magnificent and most dangerous animal in its natural habitat. And I've yet to find someone that truly disagrees with that. So thank you for having me, and truly fortunate to be with all of you.
Great, and thank you all for the wonderful introductions. I think this is going to be an exciting conversation here today, and I'm going to, at this point, take a step back and allow everybody to just have conversations with each other about this. I strongly encourage direct interactions rather than me playing redirect games or anything like that. But I will open it by asking a question about what the art of war, Sun Tzu's art of war, has meant to you, and I'll frame it in terms of at what point did you enter the funhouse and see the reflections of what this piece of literature can mean or would mean to you personally or professionally. And maybe how has that evolved over time? If you have a story to share, that might be a great way to start things out for today's conversation. With respect, I don't want to call on anybody, but if someone is moved by the spirit to speak, please begin and set us on the road.
The Sun Tzu Quaker meeting. I'll go. I'll start out because I like some of the questions because about what is the art of war, and I mean obviously we can all go out and read the historicity of it, but I always think it's kind of helpful to start with what it's not, because I think a lot of people are off put by the notion of the art of war, and understandably so, they should be. But the first thing I say that it's not about fighting, it's not about violence. War and warfare are not the same thing. War is like stratagem and strategy and thinking, and warfare is, quite honestly, about blunt force. They're not the same thing. So I think that's really an important distinction. And when I think of the art of war, I think of essentially of it is it's about how to engage with conflict in a way that doesn't actually engender and create more violence. In fact, that's probably one of the most famous slogans, which is 100. What is it? 100 victories in 100 battles is not the most skillful. Subduing the other's military without battle is the most successful. And so I always tell people because I've talked to people about the art of war, and sometimes they get stuck. Like, oh, really? Is that really that relevant today? And I'm like, oh yeah, it is. But I say, well, take the title, The Art of War, which in Chinese it's Sun Tzu Bing Fa, which Bing and Fa, it's Ping and Fa. If you look at the Chinese character or the ideogram for Bing, it can be translated in a million different ways. It can mean war, it can mean conflict, it can be combat, it can be battle, it can be military, or as the way that our good friend Erik translated as strategy or stratagem. And so the second character, Fa, that's also kind of a really complex character because it basically kind of refers to like the proper way of doing things. So it's basically kind of like models and standards that can be copied and repeated. And so I think of the art of war as, this is just my interpretations, as strategic methods. And I think that that's probably kind of faithful to Sun Tzu. I'm not a historian, but I think that's kind of faithful to his original objective, which is how do you achieve victory with through positioning and without resorting to violence and battle. And I think if you struggle with the title of The Art of War, I think maybe sometimes reframing it as the art of strategy is a good way. So I'll defer to everyone else here, but that's one of the first ways I try to help folks who struggle with the title that, hey, it's actually can be quite helpful to you.
Yeah, I was playing around with the title, The Art of Conflict. That could be, you mentioned the word conflict, and that's something we all can relate to as human beings, right? And to take another concrete example, one of the first applications for me was playing not field hockey, not ice hockey. It's a sport called floorball, which is sort of indoor ice hockey. But think of it as ice hockey, if you will. And there you want to be inscrutable. You wanna be not invisible, but you don't want your opponents to read you. You want to be unpredictable, in a positive sense, because then you will win that game of floorball or ice hockey versus your competitor. So that little thing of not doing the expected thing, but rather the unexpected thing, and thereby win the game, and that you can apply to any sport, be it basketball or football or whatever. So just to give another concrete example on it.
Maybe if I could add something to this around not only the engagement people have with the art of war and the struggle they have with the framing, wars in the title, and I like exploring different framings like strategy or conflict, because I think that can help with shifting that a little bit. Another kind of problematic engagement that I've seen with the art of war material is one of academic musing. Or another version of it is sort of, for lack of a better way, just like broing out and saying, yes, art of war, I'm so advanced.
Yeah.
Business warfare. And it's not even just off-putting, it's silly in a way, because it misses the point entirely. And also it's a problematic way to engage with it. And kind of the way that I found myself engaging with the material was as a thinking space. Things were going on in my life that were extremely difficult, and they involved dispositions of power. And so I did not go to the material for answers so much as a set of boundaries within which to think and to consider, and kind of going through the material over and over again. So I thought I'd offer a little bit of that.
Very powerful all around. It's interesting. I've always looked at reality as a collection of tensions that has energy. And I think we've all been in organizations, right, or worked with people that seem lifeless, essentially, where there's nothing real perhaps there in terms of life. So the tensions are perhaps missing. And then we have relationships that are tenuous, and they do look toward victory, look for that win-win more than becoming destructive with each other. So I've always looked at reality in that way, as a collection of tensions. And when I think of a conflict, it is a tension to be explored, exactly as you're all mentioning. So I look at the art of war is really how to work with those tensions in any which way that is creative versus merely destructive. There are aspects of it that can become destructive, but truly creative in that form, and curious. So starting off with first being curious about what those tensions are, and then being creative with them to accomplish something bigger, the whole being more than the sum of its parts in every dimension, personal, professional, you name it.
Yeah, and I would add, there's something that Ben said. It just kind of just the whole bro culture around the art of war, which is like so antithetical to that what the art of war is about. But just kind of in the spirit of James Gimian. So both Cy and I think we all know James, but James Gimian wrote this wonderful Denma translation group, which is just a fantastic translation. And Jim, always says it's important to understand that whether the book was written by, the text was written by Sun Tzu, or it's a compilation of military leaders from that time, that's actually irrelevant, because the document stands on itself, the wisdom. But it's really important to think of it as kind of this natural flowering or kind of human faculties. That's what it came out of. And I think the other thing, again, just kind of thinking of from what Ben said about how to properly frame it, I think it's really important not to think of the art of war as this foreign import, this thing from the East or this thing from China. It is broadly, it's a gift to humanity. And that means that we have every right ourselves to kind of enter into and join that wisdom tradition, and join the conversation, and join the contemplative aspect of it, which I think is kind of what Ben said, it kind of gave me thinking space. And I think that's, in the spirit of Jim Gimian, that's really important to know that we all have, it's not this import, it's not this thing that comes from outside of us. It's something that's part of collective humanity. And we have every right to join in the conversation and in that wisdom tradition.
And to hook onto that, Rod, I think you're onto something important here, because it's about succeeding together. Sometimes you shouldn't frame it as winning. I mean, I just took the sports metaphor where it's about winning, right? But if you frame it as succeeding together, and success being fulfilling your purpose. I think that's something that we can all relate to, not only in business, but also in private life and in communities and whatnot. So this succeeding together sustainably, I think, is important, because it's about not wasting resources, not wasting people, not wasting time. So that's really important. And finally, the comment I want to make is at this stage is it's turbulent times. This was written in very, very turbulent times. We think it's turbulent these days, with COVID and with everything going on, but it was 10x or 100x worse at the time. Hundreds of years of wars, pandemics in the plural, and social upheaval of revolutions, one after the other. So there is an element of turbulence there, and that makes it super relevant in today's times.
You used the magic word for me. You mentioned communities, which is my particular focus or world that I work through, helping organizations put together plans for community building, whether it's for a brand or for an association or whomever. And as I was listening to all of you, I think one of the things that stood out for me was just even the opening of the Denma text and the Ames edition of this too. Talking about war is the great matter of the state, or the Ames calls it a vital matter of the state. Vital is interesting as a word choice, because it's about life. It's about how we navigate life, how we move through this space, and that it's of the state, and the state is us as a social contract, together, with each other. And so, as I continue to live with and interact with this particular text, I'm always struck by how much it's about making sure we're avoiding war, if at all possible, that we're navigating conflict in ways that are intelligent and wise, as a sage commander, would be. So that's absolutely something that's been on my mind as you were all kind of talking about your encounters with it.
Yeah, Todd, I was just going to add, just thinking about, again, the terminology and how it's very easy to trip over that terminology. And I'm looking down, so I apologize. I'm reading something, but I keep thinking about, and Ben's a master of this. I've seen him work in real time, just kind of reframing things so that people, so he gets traction with them and helps them. And I'm looking through this. This is actually through this is something from Jim Gimian, but it's like a broader definition of key terms. So military is the energy you apply to accomplish your goal. I think that's a great way to look. You see the word military throughout the text and we struggle with it. Well, maybe think of it as kind of the energy that you have to apply to accomplish your goal. And I know Sai will have something to say about this. And then the general. Well, the general is just the leader, right? And we're all leaders. Anybody who's trying to accomplish something in life, whatever it is, we are a leader because we have an end vision, and we have something we're trying to accomplish, and we're trying to look at the current situation, assess what we have to work with, and try to create coincidence and make the outcome that we want, right? That's what a leader is. Troops. Well, troops are the people you work with to accomplish your goal. That's the system. The enemy, and I think this is the one that people struggle with a lot. That's the other. That's the one you want to bring around to this notion of taking whole, which we'll probably talk about here in a little bit. But the notion of taking whole is more than just win-win. It's kind of alchemical. It's trying to bring people into this broader context and view. Feudal lords. I think we can identify, any of us who've worked in large companies can identify with feudal lords, leaders with localized interests and power. And then battle. And that battle is when conflict occurs and things get messy. And then victory, without fighting, inclusive, and benefiting the whole, which I think that's we can talk about that more when we get to the notion of taking whole. But I just thought that would be helpful. Kind of, again, you were talking about it's the matter of the state, and maybe just kind of reframing some of those words that we run into the text that we trip over, because it doesn't seem like, oh, I don't want to talk about my enemy right now, but the enemy is the other. It's the other. It's not necessarily the person.
Not necessarily a person. Absolutely. I was just gonna add that as well. As I'm thinking about trying to build coalitions of people or communities, together. My goal is to find what are their commonalities and what is it that they oppose. and that could be a situation, it could be an illness, it could be, some gap in that represents a need or a stressor, or something that can be addressed. And so I think the art of war is very applicable in those kinds of situations.
Absolutely.
I would love to kind of hear what you folks think relative to the following, if you will, very, very specifically. I was introduced to it at an extremely young age. Actually, some people are shocked as to how young I was when I was introduced to it through my father. How can you even digest it was a common statement that I always get back. But the thing that struck me so deeply, and we haven't mentioned the word, I don't believe, but it's naturalness. There is something extremely natural, innate, if you will, is the closest correlation that I think, as we were having a conversation, Rod, you kind of steered us toward. But it's so natural, and it taps into human nature, it taps into our identity, and it taps into how we work with reality. So those three pieces, one is naturalness. I'd love to get your thoughts. And then I've termed it as the sacred triad, our identity as a manifestation in reality, dealing with our own human nature.
Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be the first. I'm always the first to talk, so I'm restraining myself.
I can take a leap here because I feel like the least ready to talk about this, because I don't have a lot of answers, only a lot of questions. But it seems like the naturalness of it seems related to sort of the Taoist underpinnings. The one book that really kind of is a recommendation of a friend of mine, Deciphering Sun Tzu by Derek MC Yuen. Look at you. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you,
I think
Rod.
one of the most important books ever. Along with the Denma translations, I think this is one of the most important books, which, by the way, it's not a translation of the Art of War. This is a beautiful book. And Derek is a cool dude. I've gotten to know him just slightly.
That's amazing. It is, I believe he still might be a Hong Kong based scholar. Really tried to situate the material in the culture, in the history, in just context upon context of how did we get here. What basically, if all of the translations are about the work itself, I think Derek did an amazing job creating a world around it that makes that work fit inside a piece, like a puzzle piece. And what his work is what actually made me realize how little I know. Recognizing that, for example, extension and return, tensions between extremes, interplay between extremes. I don't know where to take it from here, but I just feel so feeble as I begin to think about these concepts, such as these tensions. The other concept Derek mentions is conditions and consequences. You might think of it as dispositions of power. These are some starting places that maybe we could explore a little bit, but I feel so inadequate to explore them. And that's what keeps me coming back and asking the question, I think.
And Ben, you're the person who hit me to that book. You're the one who turned me on to that Deciphering Sun Tzu book.
And my mentor, Dr. Jay Bloom, said, you might want to read this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm glad I could pass that along.
Can we, let's talk about the I don't want to say opposing views, but, I think one of them is a Western view, which is kind of that means end. It's kind of that Greek view of creator created. And actually, Erik, I should just shut up and let Erik, because this is Erik's total wheelhouse. But creator and created, whereas the Eastern, the more Eastern is more of a processual view of one side. One doesn't create the other; they are implicate within each other, and so you don't create and you don't have a means and then an end. Instead, you enter into the process, and it's processual. And so rather than, as Ben said, rather than thinking about means and end, which, man, we are just, as Westerners, we can't help but think that way. We just do. And I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just there is another cosmology, and there's another approach to knowledge and reality, and I think, Sai, as you said, interacting with reality, and that processual view is really important, because it's more about trying to foment the conditions so that you can get the consequence, which, again, I'll quote the Art of War, which is victory can be known, it cannot be made. So, man, we are just like, it could be made, we just got to do step one, step two, step three, all those means, and we'll get to this end. And the art of war is like, no. You have to create the conditions for that particular outcome. I don't know, Ben, did I articulate that well?
Yeah. And I think we should also maybe like back up just a little bit and talk about the thing itself. So means ends framing, I think of it like a hammer. It's like, I want an outcome and I'm going to go whack the world until I get it. And then I compare that to the conditions and consequences framing of things. And it's, hey, you are in an immense number of processes that are already unfolding. So if you think about gardening a little bit, like if you think about your hopes and ambitions for the world, less about being like having that end design in mind for how everything is going to be perfect and you're going to go whack it with a hammer until it happens. Gardening is kind of like, hey, so enter the stream, kind of let the processes that are already unfolding carry you along. Don't miss the cool things that might pop up along the way, but for the most part, align yourself with the way things are already going. The fact that the sun comes up in the morning and goes down at night. The fact that there are seasons, rain happens during these seasons most commonly and not during these others. The fact that plants seem to do well during sunshine and rain and not so well during the cold and the frost. So these are things that are already happening. Can you learn what those are, first of all? So you stop opposing them and you align yourself with them and get carried along with them, not try to intervene. And then start to notice within that context what opportunities might appear. Erik, I feel like I'm doing such a terrible job, though. I feel like you're brimming. You have to be brimming with ways of explaining this, and I'm curious what you think.
That was beautifully said, though, Ben.
I think it was a brilliant explanation, Ben. Thank you for that, and thanks, Rob, for bringing up the topic. Naturalness, nature. There's so many examples, right? Gardening is one. My favorite example is water. I mean, the classic thing: be like water, follow the line of least resistance. Those kind of metaphors are really, really interesting, and they're very concrete. We can talk about very abstract things, but water, that's pretty common, and water can take many shapes. And if you think about the word purpose or Tao, as you say in Eastern philosophy, the original meaning of that is actually, basically building a canal where you can, take the water where you want it to. And that's back to the conditions and consequences. You build the canal to take the water somewhere. And that's your processual view of what's going on. You can make it very concrete because all those Chinese characters, they have a very concrete meaning from way back. And then they turn more and more abstract over time. But I think it's fascinating that purpose actually comes from building canals to channel water in the right direction to make it go where you want it, be it growing rice or whatever you did back in the day in China. So I think that example resonates with me, at least, the water metaphor.
If I add to kind of what you folks have already shared, there's a power to the whole notion of polar complements and the unity of opposites, and it is very much a shift, exactly as you've mentioned, from one paradigm to another. Once you make that shift, you can't go back, and that's the amazing, that's the magic, for lack of any other words.
100% agree. You can't see it a different way once you start kind of discovering that.
Yeah. And it penetrates your whole life, professional, personal, on every level. So when I work with organizations, if you will, and I work with teams and executives, just throwing out the notion of, hey, how do you've got two decisions. How do you unify, if you will, two paths that you could take? How do you unify those opposites, as opposing as they may be? And that opens up a whole different vernacular for people.
And I love that it's a challenge to creativity for those leaders, to help them to think a little bit differently, to get out of those dyadic, it's either or, on off. That's it's a false distinction. How do we blend these things and turn them into something more interesting?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna transition. Go ahead, Rod.
I was just going to add one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, this plays really into this. I think one of the most important, if not the most important concept in the art of war, which is the notion of taking whole. Some people call it holism, but it's the notion of taking whole, and certainly that's the way it's talked about in the Denma translation from our good friend Jim. And I think one thing that's often overlooked is the context out of which the art of war was born, which is this period that Erik talked about, the Warring States period. We think it's chaotic now. It's nothing compared to that. And this was roughly speaking about, it's like what, 450 BC to 225, around that time. It's like 200 years of time. But it was a time, that what we know of China, there was like 75 or more fiefdoms and principalities and little kingdoms, and they were all vying for power with their neighbors. And the unique aspect about this time was that there were no standing armies, essentially. I mean, practically there weren't. So if a general or a feudal lord wanted to wage war, he'd have to work with a general, and they would essentially conscript all the sons of the farmers in his kingdom. So the great insight by Sun Tzu was, he's like, whoa, wait a second. If in this war I kill all the soldiers in the opposing army, I've effectively killed all the farmers. Well, crap. That means then there's not going to be anything left to grow the food for the population in the territory that I want to take over. So that leads to probably that, that best known slogan or maxim is subduing the other's military without battle is the most skillful. And so the art of war's view is this one of interconnectedness, of holism. And it's, it's not about taking, like you said, that didactic, like taking your opposite, subduing and destroying. It's about bringing them into whole. And it's bigger than win-win. It's an alchemical, I'm not describing this well, but it's this alchemical notion of bringing people and bringing them into a broader, bigger picture. I'm not doing that justice, but I think that taking whole thing, that's a really important concept that we miss.
And just to hook onto that, Rod, with a concrete example, how to make something bigger than the parts, and one correlative pair. I choose to call them correlative pairs. You can call them yin or yang, or you can call them a lot of things. But one correlative pair would be the expected and the surprise, and that you can use, of course, in conflicts and in war and in sports, as I mentioned earlier. But my favorite example in business is not about surprising your customers. It's about positively surprising them. So you give them what they expect. Let's say a browser, and you can make a call, and you can text. That's what's expected. But the positive surprise is you get it in one device that you desire to use, and that was the iPhone that was launched in 2007. So the expected and the surprise makes something truly awesome that people desire to use. So that's a very concrete business example of going beyond this. Should we only do the expected? Should we only do the positive surprise? Well, you need a bit of both, right? And then it becomes truly brilliant, and people will love you and your products.
I was kind of curious if you all have experiences with these sort of polarities leading to each other. Because it's one of the interplay part of this is really curious. It's like, so strength leads to weakness, weakness leads to strength, surprise leads to expected leads to surprise. And part of one of the things that has reduced my anxiety dramatically about the last 5, 6, 7 years has been the fact that overextension always leads to return and vice versa. And so I'm curious if you have stories from your life experiences where a dynamic like that made itself, I guess, apparent to you. Someone really strong became really weak, or really weak became very strong, that kind of thing.
It's a really excellent question, Ben, and it actually plays directly to the transition I was going to make. Like, how are we applying the wisdom that we've been talking about in theory here to our our lives and our our current business situation? So I think that's a very appropriate segue for us at this point.
I'll just add real quickly, and I'll lead that back to kind of a personal story that's much like Ben. I think I came into contact, or I certainly started using and practicing the art of war during a time of great chaos and tragedy and struggle in my life, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But I was just thinking about one. I'm just thinking about, in particular, my kids. As my kids are older, 16. 20, 21, and 24. But I was thinking about, and I hate to tell their stories out publicly, but one of them was struggling academically, and I was just constantly pushing on them. I wasn't horrible, but I'm like, I was just like trying to help them through this. I just couldn't see it, and it was that thing where I was being coercive, and I was trying to use, in Ben's term, the hammer. I was trying to find the means to the end. And then I just let go. And I said, dude, you just figure it out for yourself. And I'm not going to, I'm going to try to stay out. I'm here. I'm trying to support it. And then suddenly the dude graduates with honors on the president's list, not just the dean's list, but the president. I got out of the way. And I suddenly just allowed something to happen. And I found out that he didn't need me involved in there. And I don't know if that quite answers, but it was a great example where he went from weak to strong. And all I had to do is not try to force that process. I just needed to observe it and nurture it. But I didn't need to try to force it. I don't know if that helps, but that's one of my big examples.
Control versus like release.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One is born out of the other, right?
Yeah.
It's an amazing story, Rod. Thank you.
Erik, did you have a thought?
Well, I'm thinking it's such a very good question, and I'm trying to find something business related, and it's somewhat related. And I'm thinking of a friend of mine who was a really good tester, and in product development and software development, we talk about this. We have the testers, and we have the designers, and then we have the architects, and they're all awesome people, and sometimes they even talk to each other and make even more awesome things. But back in the day, this was late 90s, it was very much boundaries, and this guy was super good with testing. And now we talk about DevOps, this, mm-hmm. which is sort of a cycle. DevOps work together, right? And this guy sort of did that transition or that move because he became a brilliant system architect or a system designer, a system engineer. So totally different endpoints in the product development space. But somehow he reached, he couldn't go further with the testing. He was like, yeah, I know this stuff. I can be brilliant at this. Let's do the total opposite thing. And that was like the other end of the product development flow. And he started from basically nothing, but it turned out it was two sides of the same coin, being the system tester and the system designer. He was brilliant at that as well. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was amazing.
And I'll add to it. It's interesting. Ben, I'll shift the question slightly in a way that I've leveraged it, quite honestly, because I love the question. The question I pose back to myself in that context, as one thing leads to another, is what are people fixated on, and how do they avoid fixation? So what I mean by that, on a very practical sense, if I'm engaging with someone, right, or an organization or something, a lot of organizations are fixated on strategy, for example. Well, they're fixated on so much on strategy that they forget that they got to think about leadership, they got to think about execution, they got to think about human dynamics, they got a whole bunch of things. They're fixated on their notion of whatever strategy means. Or I've had clients, I love it. I had one client tell me, hey, our operating model is incredible. It's so efficient. Well, they got disrupted in the marketplace, and before you knew it, because they were overly fixated, right, on their operating model, they forgot about their business model, or the opposite, of that. So So what's really intriguing is a millions examples, but just looking at what people are fixated on, because ultimately one thing leads to another and then things break down. But that fixation is a big one that we've all called out. It's, you know, it's within the wisdom, etc. I think we've already mentioned it, but it's another way to look at it.
That's interesting, Sai. You know, as I think about my work and my practice, so many organizations begin by being overly fixated on the technology solution, as opposed to they may say they're looking for a strategy, but they're very down in the weeds of like, how are we executing? How are we building this thing before they've even thought about assessing the landscape, understanding the dispositions of things and what the actual needs happen to be. And so helping them to see beyond the immediate moment of understanding, well, if you're trying to build this space for your customers to come together, have you asked them what they want? Have you actually had any direct conversations like recently with what they're looking for and what they need? And you know,
I love Ben's look. Talk to
why
who?
would we do that? Right? Nope.
And if I just add one quick note, if you'll fixation beyond bias, we could all say we have bias, right? We're natural human beings. We're creatures of habit, quite honestly. So bias is a given, for a lack of better words. We just need to be aware of it. But fixation takes it a whole different angle. So it's really interesting.
So I'll add. I'll kind of go back directly to the art of war, and then I know this will open a conversation where I just need to shut my mouth because two of the world's experts on worldly map are on this call. But I always go back to the 5 fundamentals, which is chapter 1 of the art of war. Some people call it the 5 assessments, the 5 estimates. I call it the 5 fundamentals because I know this was the first art of war book I ever got. I think Erik will know this one. I know Sai knows it. It's the R.L. Wing version. And what I love is that nobody knows who R.L. Wing is. Nobody. Not even Derek Yuen. I asked him. He's like, nope, I don't know. Talk about Tao, you know, just like completely formless. Nobody knows. But back to the point is there's this 5 fundamentals. And my brother was an extremely successful entrepreneur. You know, like he sold his company for a lot of money. And he always told me, chapter 1, the 5 fundamentals, that's all you ever need. He goes, throw all the rest of those business books away. He goes, that is the most important thing. And this has a tie to worldly mapping, which again, I'll shut up once I say my part. But you know, it starts out with the first one is purpose, and which basically, as Erik alluded to, kind of describes your moral imperative. It's like the scope, you know, it's the scope of what you're doing and why you're doing it. But it's also the reasons why other people follow you, or maybe they don't follow you. And the original term was Tao, which actually I think, and I know Sai will comment on this, it's much bigger than just this notion of a leader with a vision. It's a leader who's in tune with the way of how things flow and get done naturally. It's much bigger than a vision. It's much bigger than just purpose. And then the second one is climate. And climate describes the forces that are acting on your environment. And somebody talked about this earlier, and I wanted to bring it up. I think it was Ben talking about just gardening. You know, and it's, you know, basically in modern business terms, it's like it's the seasonal patterns, it's the stakeholder needs, and it's the competitors' positions and inactions. But it's the external factors that are way beyond your control that could possibly impede your ability to realize that purpose. And I always say, if you want a great example, just think of Napoleon and Hitler attacking Russia during wintertime. Great example of when you don't consider climate first, that's, you know, disaster is going to happen. You can know your landscape, you can have maps and all this stuff, but if you don't consider climate first, I guarantee it will kick your butt. The next one is landscape, which describes the terrain you're attempting to navigate, and that's about understanding the challenges and the obstacles that might constrain your efforts. It's also about determining, and this is where worldly mapping comes in, determining your positions of strength, where you need to prepare and build capacity for advantage. It's also about identifying opportunities where you could move to. You know, at the end of the day, it's about position and movement. And then the last one is doctrine, which is kind of like describes the ways of operating and organizing and communicating, but basically like universally good best practices and stuff like that. And I always think about Simon Wardley because he talks about this, a great deal. He goes, I'm paraphrasing, but Simon Wardley said, once I started reading Sun Tzu, I started noticing this kind of really insidious and pervasive trend in the business world and in business literature, where almost every document he read, strategy document or strategy book, starts with purpose and immediately jumps over to that doctrine, that last one in that cycle. And he's like, well, wait a second, where was climate and leadership, or climate and landscape? How come we didn't visit that? And he soon kind of started realizing all these secrets of success business books that he'd been reading, they talk about all these universally applicable best practices, but they don't really address the context out of which they were born. So I think the 5 fundamentals is one of the greatest things. If you can get into that practice of using that to assess things strategically, I think I have benefited more from learning that. And honestly, it's taken me 20 years to figure out how valuable that is. And I'll stop there because I'm sure Ben and Erik can talk about that from a Wardley mapping perspective.
Erik, what do you think?
Yeah, I think landscapes, well, we know maps are good with normal landscapes, and of course with business and technology landscapes, you visualize something, and that's where Simon Wardley has done something amazing for the business and tech community by making something very abstract, very concrete. I mean, you can stand at the whiteboard and draw your business landscape and your tech landscape and how it evolves, and by doing that together, you will much more easily come to the right strategic choices and strategic decisions, or any decision, because you see the same thing, and because you've drawn it together at the whiteboard. So that's extremely powerful and beautiful, and complements Sun Tzu very, very well, because we can actually see the stuff we're talking about. And it's not a discussion between me and you and who's going to win the discussion. It's about improving that map that we're drawing together. And if we have a slightly better map than our competitors, we will succeed.
I like to think of the 5 factors as 5 Ps, because it makes it easier for me to remember. Is like purpose, pictures, principles, patterns, and plays. Mm-hmm. And the pictures are kind of what help us access a lot of the ideas, because in business, we're not so much conquering geographical territory or like whatever. We're dealing with matter. Well, ideas are matter. We're dealing with ideas primarily. Artifacts that we create, things like that. And so we need a way to access those, and pictures are a great way to do that. But you can also call them maps if you prefer, if you want to make 5 Ps out of maps. But pictures, maps, principles, patterns, and plays.
I love that. That's awesome. Maps. It reminds me of P.G. Woodbough's book called Smith with a P. The P is silent.
Pictures will do.
And I think the cool thing with those 5 fundamental factors, or 5 Ps, is that you assess them regularly, and then it's a matter of, is it quarterly or is it daily? Well, that depends on your context. If you're Scania, the truck maker, you have real-time management, and you do it on a almost on an hour cycle. If you're Scania, the R&D part of Scania, the truck maker, you do it on a 24-hour cadence. If you're Ericsson, where I used to work, well, we did strategy, retrospectives, and prospectives every quarter, which was amazing because everyone else did it yearly, or even more seldom or never. So those assessments are super important, that you do them regularly, because the world is changing, right?
Absolutely. Where has the time gone, my friends?
Do you mind if I add just one other thing?
Yeah,
if you will?
please, yes, yeah.
Exactly as much. I think the grounding, this ground zero, if you will, really exactly as Rod mentioned us, going from Tao, heaven, earth, general, and method. People will jump, exactly as Rod said, from Tao to method. And the real magic is in how heaven and earth come together. And as the book says, right, how the general attains heaven and earth. That attainment is where the catalytic challenge is that attainment between heaven and earth, if you will, the dynamics and context.
And so, you are the general. That's the thing, you are the general, as Jim Gimian would say.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is, exactly as you had in your blog, Rod. I mean, that is, if no one takes anything away from today, just this alone, this piece of the conversation is significant of a launching point.
Yeah, I'll add. I know we're coming to end here, and thinking just about a post that I saw from Ben the other day about how good strategy is always problem focused. And I always say good strategy work is challenge based and problem focused. And we're talking about this practice of, if you look at the wheel, people jump immediately from purpose and they go right to doctrine and they go right to leadership. And so I always use this example, this anecdote, and where. And this has a personal significance for me, which we didn't get to, but we'll get to next time, because I lost my wife to cancer. But you think about going to a doctor and you go, oh, hey, I've got this lump on my neck and I have a family history of cancer. And the doctor goes, doctor skips right past the diagnosis phase. He goes, that's okay. We're going to focus on leadership, doctor. We're going to focus on diet, exercise, and positive mental attitude. Don't worry, you'll be fine. You're like, whoa, wait a second. I have family history of cancer. I'm kind of worried here. That's okay. The doctor doubles down. We're going to focus on diet, exercise, and positive mental attitude. And that's what Simon Wardley was saying. He goes, we see this in business environments. I've seen it. We've all seen it so often, where we start the conversation with the purpose, and then we go right to leadership and doctrine. And the last thing I'll share is I shared this conversation with I referred to my brother as a really successful entrepreneur. I told this to him, this anecdote, and he goes, you know what? I read that. I almost vomited. It made me ill, because I've seen that so many times where people, and he's a big fan of the five fundamentals. And he says, I see that all the time where people just talk about leadership and doctrine. I'm like, whoa, you got to understand the problem. You got to understand the problem or the challenge first. And it's like Rodney Dangerfield and, Back to School. He goes, that's like fantasy land. So anyway, I had to throw in a Rodney Dangerfield quote.
I think that's awesome. I love it. I think anyone who has tuned in and stuck with us through this conversation, recognizes that everyone here on the panel has thought about and engaged deeply with Sun Tzu's work. It's taken them on various journeys through Wordley Maps and John Boyd and other schools of thought around this. I'm hoping that in the second panel meeting that we have this Thursday coming up, same time, same bat time, same bat channel for those of a certain generation. I'm hoping we can delve a little further into some of those personal stories, personal interactions, personal applications of the 5 fundamentals or the 5 Ps, and how that has worked in our individual practices. Because I've related as well with that entire idea of encouraging people that I work with to start assessing the heavens and the earth. What are the situations in which they're finding themselves, and looking at that. And even assessing the leaders themselves. Like that, for me, that's been a key part of my practice, is understanding what their perceptions are to begin with. Have they got the wisdom and the humility and the courage, to do the things that are necessary to achieve what that purpose is, to achieve the Tao that they're looking for. So I'm hoping we can kind of continue the energy of this conversation into the next session to talk a little bit further about some of that and much, much more. Sai, thanks again for convening this group. Honored to be a part of the group here and to help lubricate the conversation to a degree. And I don't know if anyone wanted to say anything in closing, but I feel like I'm ready to jump into the next conversation already.
I appreciate each and every one of you. This has been really fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been amazing. Looking forward to Thursday.
And you can't tell that we're all just slightly passionate about this topic.
Definitely. Thank you. And we'll definitely be together on Thursday. Thank you.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.